welcome to this episode of Death is for the Dying, a special season of the Life is for the Living podcast. I'm your host, Rebecca Richmond. One of the hardest things anybody can face is receiving a diagnosis of a terminal disease, either for themselves or for a loved one. One person who has experienced this trauma is our guest Mara, whose husband Pat was diagnosed with amyotrophic lateral sclerosis, or ALS. ALS was formerly known as Lou Gehrig's disease and is a neurological disorder that results in increasing muscle weakness. Life expectancy after diagnosis is usually 2 to 5 years. Mara's husband, Pat, is still alive at the time of recording, making it 10 years since he was officially diagnosed. But Mara and Pat didn't know that in the beginning. In fact, they didn't know anything in the beginning, because ALS diagnosis isn't straightforward.
Well, his diagnosis happened in July. It was July 21st in 2016. And he had just been tripping when he ran. Like, that was the big symptom, and he couldn't figure out why. We couldn't see anything wrong. We didn't know what was going on. So he got like a battery of tests. But luckily, he has a really good doctor who said, "Hey, I think your left leg is atrophying. That's not good. That's sounding like something like MS, worst case. It could be worse, but probably MS or something like that," which just was like a shot to the heart, because I know a lot of folks with MS, and it's not a fun disease. It's hard. So ALS is a process of elimination type of diagnosis. So he had more and more tests and ruled out brain cancer, ruled out all the things. And so he was left with, boy, it looks like you have ALS. And then sure enough, all the symptoms like wasting, like the first thing was his left thumb just turned to like, it just was skin and bones. It was really freaky to look at. You don't think of your thumb as having much flesh anyway, but when you see it with no flesh, it was scary. And then like in a month it was just basically eating him, like going up his arm. So that was the date they said, yeah, we really think it's ALS. Even his ALS neurologist that he got to 2 months later said, I see smoke, but I don't see fire. It does look like ALS, and I will give you that diagnosis because this is what it looks like, but get a second opinion. And we did all that. And it was a process, but luckily for Pat, it was only a year. Like most people, they think they have back problems. They get back surgery, or they have knee surgery, or they think they have carpal tunnel. They go through all these horrific surgeries and then find out it's ALS. So we were really lucky in that sense. We knew we had a really fast diagnosis time and could get a jump on it. And you asked how I felt about it. It was just brutal. Like, I spent the first 3 days on July 21st, I spent that day and the next 2 days just literally in a fetal position, crying and sobbing and just stressing. And Pat didn't want to tell anybody. He let me tell my mom, but that's a very typical reaction. Like when you have a terminal diagnosis, especially a brutal one, where you're going to suffer and suffer, you just don't want to tell people. He just put it off as long as he could. But I told my mom, and then a couple months later, he was okay with telling his family. That was really hard. But yeah, so I was just fetal for 3 days, and then I was just in books and like trying to figure this out. Like, as I read, it was like, what? Wait, what? It's 150 years. We have 0 treatments. It's 0. Like, think of that number, 0. So it was like, the more I read, the more I was like, what? Oh my gosh, what? We haven't spent the Ice Bucket money yet? What?
The Ice Bucket Challenge was a social media fundraising campaign for research into ALS.
So I just kept reading and reading, and I still haven't stopped. I just keep trying to figure out what I can do to like fix this problem of this brutal disease that is not rare, by the way. Folks think it, but it is not. It's just that folks die right away. So they can't fight it. There's no voice. So I've just been trying to figure out, like, how do we fix this? This is just a crazy land that we're in. So yeah, that's our story pretty much. They say half the people diagnosed will die within 14 months, and that would have been true. Like, Pat would have been at the 2-year mark, he started to not be able to breathe. It's a little kind of a cross between he was aspirating on saliva because he couldn't swallow and his lungs were getting weak. There were a lot of surprises, but one was the people who came out of the woodwork, especially those early days, people we had just been acquaintances with. We felt close to them. We would joke with them at work and such, but they just came out of nowhere with guns a-blazing. It's going to make me cry. They could see us hurting a lot. So they just made ramps for us. I just felt like all these people were just hugging us all the time. And I know that's not everybody's experience. Pat was a special person. He just always makes people feel great, and it was so great to work with, so great to be friends with. So I'm sure that's part of it. But they just came out in droves, cooked us meals, just for a year and a half, I'd say. They just swaddled us in love, and they still do to some extent. But in that really hard time, it was probably the hardest time. Just all these people that I barely knew. And Pat said, boy, I barely knew that person too. I was like, oh, I thought that was your friend. No, he's just a really good guy. He really wants to help. He sees our pain, It was just unbelievable. And the other side of that is folks that I was really close to, I thought I could just keep going to them for stuff. They just weren't there for us. That was shocking to me, but mostly it was just the positive outpouring of support that I just never saw coming. From family too. Our family were superheroes back then too, and still are. They still are. Yeah, I think that was the biggest surprise to me.
I've seen that too with the sudden death of my PhD advisor. The people who really helped out were not the people that I was expecting.
Yeah. It's so strange how that is.
Somebody, who I was sort of casual friends with, she sat down and she's like, okay, who do we need to call? That was a rough day, calling people to tell them that someone was dead. But she was there through it, and she helped me.
Yeah. Do you mind me asking, was she a person who had a tragedy? Because I find that mostly it's people who had to deal with something hard.
I don't know her well enough to say.
I wonder, because that's what we found a lot of, but not every single time, but as we went on this journey, the people who would reach out to us most and try to help were people who had to deal with something really big and horrible in their lives.
Yeah, and I imagine that impulse to okay, what you need is help to figure out who to call and what their phone numbers are.
Yeah.
That must have come from experience, 100%.
Exactly. I do. I see that so much, and it fuels me in other things. I want people to feel that for people. And it happened to me too, by the way. Before such a thing happened to me, I was those people saying, oh, that's genetic. What are we going to do? Move on. I wanted to help. I would help in my small way, but I wouldn't get in there, roll up my sleeves and help. Damn it. They need help. Don't just say you're praying and give them a little donation. Help. They are drowning. We can almost tell, and I've started to do this. Actually, we went to Good Friday service, and someone came up to us and said, "Can I help you?" And I was like, did you have a tragedy in your life? And she was like, I have stuff, and walked away. And I was like, yep, you can just spot them. You can just spot them.
So is that I mean, I know some of those of us who haven't had that exact experience struggle with how do I support this person?
I think that's a huge part of it. People don't know how, because they haven't had to go through it. They don't know, what is the line that I cross? I don't want to be nosy, especially with Pat didn't want to tell anybody. I mean, how do I help someone who hasn't really made it public, or even that's a challenge for sure. I think for me, in my case, it was partly that, but also I just thought, well, what can I do? I feel like I was a cop-out before I had a big thing happen to me. I don't know. It was interesting to me, because I always thought of myself as a very humanitarian person, very caring, very empathetic, and would go the extra mile for someone in need. But I sure was not that person, because I think back now to all the instances where I could have helped more, or gotten involved more. And I didn't need this to see that back then, but I did, I guess, because I'm only seeing it now. But yeah, I want something I would like to bring to people, because I think it will change so much that's wrong with this world, is see that before you're stuck with it, because you can't do much when you're in this situation. We need people who can actually see this to change it before their loved one gets it, because these neuro diseases are on the increase. They are fast and furious, and they're happening to a lot more people every year, and they're scary. And we don't know anything about them. We don't have any treatments for them. We don't know why they attack. But like, unless you're in it, you don't really care. You're like, that's unfortunate. Alzheimer's sucks. Yeah, I know someone who has it. Yeah, it sucks. Next, I'm going to go live my best life. And I want the world to like start to tackle these really bad things that are happening. World hunger and, these bad neuro things that are just brutal diseases, just the most brutal there are. They really are. Some cancers too are just horrific.
What would be your advice to someone whose loved one just got a terminal diagnosis?
I know it's so cliche, and I heard it so much, and we did not do this, but just ask for help, because it's just shocking, like kind of like we were talking before, shocking who will come to your rescue. But if you don't put it out there, you're not going to get any help, and it's all on you. So this huge thing you're dealing with is not only huge to deal with, but now you're doing it alone. And it's just so impossible to do that. You really have to just try to get okay with sharing your bad situation with people. And you'll be surprised who comes to your rescue. I really believe that. Everybody in the community is just so supportive of everybody else. So I join a lot of the IMALS calls and offshoots of that organization, who have like started their own thing to like push stuff forward. And they are all so supportive. Like, they are people like me who have just no real time. They're trying to keep their jobs, and they're trying to scratch their husband's foreheads or whatever. They're doing a million things, and they're still like, what do you need? I can tell you're like scraping rock bottom. My friend, Sandy Morris, just like was so crushing to me one day, because she's fighting this thing. She was dying herself, but Pat was having a really rough 2 weeks and going through this gallbladder craziness. And she was just checking in with us every day. Like, she could barely move her fingers. She was mostly using eye gaze, and she's just like, how is Pat? How is Pat? How is Pat? The community, every person in the community is like a superhero. You have to be to get to the next day with this thing. You're like losing everything, trying to figure stuff out, figuring out machinery, you have to be all these things. And yeah, there's so much, you're on your ownness in this disease. So it takes these superhumans. So they are all just about helping everybody else.
Do you feel like since then, the time that you got diagnosed to where you are right now, do you think you've gone through all the stages of grief, like the traditional stages of grief? Do you feel like you are still grieving, or you're still in that fighting kind of mode?
It's a wonderful question, because I do feel, I looked back on this recently because of the questions, and I thought, I did have a denial phase, and I did have like just give up phase. I don't know what all of them are. What are the other ones?
Denial, anger, bargaining, depression, acceptance.
Yes, I totally did anger, big time anger. I still do have that sometimes. Bargaining, I don't know if I did that. Maybe that's the mass crazy researching that I did. I'm not sure.
Probably. Yep.
Yeah. I think I have basically come to accept it. I guess. I don't know. It's such a weird thing to think about, because we just fight so hard. Like, if you could see some of our fights, like we just had one 2 days ago, and they vary in frequency. Sometimes it's like we went 2 months without any. But usually it's like once a week. We fight so hard to keep Pat breathing, so hard. It's such a hard fight. It's so hard to think. I mean, you'd think that death would be like right front and center in your brain, but it's more just like, we're just fighting. We're just fighting. We're just fighting. We're just fighting. So you just get wrapped up in that fight, and you're just you don't think of like, what if we had to go the other way? It just doesn't really enter, maybe partly because there truly is just so little time, but yeah, maybe just my makeup, I just don't go there anymore. But in the early days, it was so hard, like to just grapple with that death looming and not knowing if he didn't know if he would get a trach.
A tracheostomy, or trach, is a surgical procedure that creates an alternate airway in the windpipe that can be connected to a breathing machine. This reduces the chance of dying due to a blocked airway, but it is invasive, expensive, requires 24-hour care, and prevents the person from speaking.
He was talking about not getting one, and very few get a trach. It's like 7% of ALS patients who get a trach. And so it was so hard when he told me that the first time. He's like, I don't know if I want to do that. It was so hard.
In our next episode, we will continue this conversation about the choices that people in Mara and Pat's situations are suddenly having to make. As always, thank you for joining us. And if you want to join this conversation about death, you can reach us at Life is for the L on Twitter and Instagram, or email us at lifeisforthelivingpodcast@gmail.com. Additionally, you can now watch us on our The Life is for the Living YouTube channel. And stay safe until next time.